ways that you test an idea, a theory, a proposition is by asking it to make a prediction and checking whether the prediction comes true or not. I believe there is a great deal of evidence for the truth of the Torah, and evidence comes in various kinds. I think one piece of evidence is a direct prediction. Now, that ought to be simple. Just read the prediction and check whether it came true or not. But because the conclusion is of such tremendous importance, a variety of ways have arisen to misunderstand the argument. I won't say that they were done purposely to misunderstand. I won't go that far. But they're used as defenses against the argument, and they are based on misunderstandings. So what I propose to do is look at the prediction in some detail, and then to explain why the prediction is genuine, and then to talk about the ways in which people have proposed to misunderstand the argument and to show why they are, in fact, misunderstandings. At the end of the 4 days, we ought to have at least one solid piece of evidence that the Torah is true. I'm going to say a few words of introduction, and then we're going to get some of these blue books, and we'll read it together. When you test theory, proposition, statement, assertion, by having it make a prediction and then checking whether the prediction comes true or not all predictions are equal. If the prediction is something which you would have expected to be true anyway, then even if it does come true, it might not support the idea. I have a machine, and I say that my machine can predict the weather long term better than any weather forecaster. I said, okay, let's see what it predicts. I said, well, punch the buttons, and it predicts that in the next 12 months in Jerusalem, it will rain between 6 and 55 times. Oh, well, given the history of rain in Jerusalem, every year it rains between 6 and 55 times. That doesn't contribute to thinking that your machine is special in any way. Everybody knows that without your machine. In order for a prediction to count, in order for it to support, it's got to be something which this theory, proposition, predicts, and other points of view would reject, either reject as impossible or reject as very unlikely. Then, when it comes true, it supports the source that predicted it. In a little more detail, we're talking about verifying something or getting support for something. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have various alternatives for looking at the world, dealing with the world, explaining the world. If you want support for A, that support has got to be in favor of A and against its competitors, B, D, C, and E. If the prediction is something which all five agree on, then it doesn't show that A is any better than the others, so it's not any support for A in its competition with B, C, D, and E. What you want is for A to predict Q, and for B, C, D, and E to say, what, Q? Not on your life, or very unlikely, something which we definitely are not expecting to happen. Then, when Q happens, it's going to support A against B, C, D, and E. That's what you want from a source. If you're going to use a prediction to support it, you want a prediction of something which other points of view would regard as unlikely. So when we take a look at a prediction, that's a crucial element to keep in mind, that it's got to have that feature. I call this selective evidence, because it's evidence for this against its competitors. But that's what we have to look for. Is it clear what I'm saying? Okay, good. So can we get a whole of a few of the blue books, and we'll read the passage together. We're on page 1077. Now, so one thing we want is a prediction of something which otherwise would be very unlikely. Also, if you are reading a passage that's supposed to be making predictions, you'd like it to be clear. If it's going to be very poetical, very vague, or very ambiguous, and in that way you will know clearly whether what is being predicted is unique or isn't unique, or whether it's probable or improbable, because it's so vague, that's not going to count either. We're not going to be interested in that because that won't help. That I'm told from those people who know ancient French, that Nostradamus is that way. The words are very, very vague, and when they give you the so-called translations into modern English, they upgrade it and they make it more specific to make it sound more spectacular, but the original isn't that way at all. So as we read through this, we're going to be careful to make sure we're taking the pieces out that are literal and clear and which describe things which we would otherwise not expect to happen. There may be other descriptions in here, and they're fine, and they're written by God, they're just not useful for us. We are trying to find a prediction that will support the truth of the Torah, which is not useful for that purpose. Okay, the game is clear? All right, let's take a look. Bottom of the page, 15. It will be, if you do not hearken to the voice of Hashem your God, to observe, to perform all his commandments, all his decrees that I command you this day, then all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Accursed will you be in the city, and accursed will you be in the land. Cursed will be your fruit basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed will be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, offspring of your cattle, flocks of your sheep and goats. Cursed will you be when you come in, and cursed when you go out. I'm inclined to think that that's very vague. Does that mean 6 years of a consistent 10% reduction? Or does it mean 1 year of a 70% reduction? Or I think it's very, very vague. And I think it would be easy to claim that it came true at a time when the causes were quite natural. There are ups and downs in production. There are ups and downs seasonal, yearly, through decades. Every 100 years or so, there's a catastrophe. I think it would be very difficult to pin anything on something as vague as this. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the text. I'm not, God forbid. But just saying, for our purposes of looking for a verifiable prediction that will be evidence, this is not going to help. Hashem will send in your midst attrition, confusion, and worry in your every undertaking that you will do until you are destroyed, till you are quickly annihilated because of the evil your deeds for having forsaken me. Now, destroyed and annihilated in English make it sound like, and there's nobody left. But that's not what it means. It means something like vast destruction, because the text will predict at the end that we will survive, and in the end we'll come back to the land of Israel. So it's not predicting that. In the Hebrew, the words are not that. It means there'll be a disaster. Okay, there'll be a disaster. Again, if you have strict standards for precision, disasters happen. During the time of the judges, the Philistines attacked and conquered parts of Israel and slaughtered people and burned farms and so on and so on. Would this qualify? Would that qualify? That happened a number of times. It happened a number of times in natural ways. I don't think we have anything yet that is precise enough. Hashem will attack plagues to you till it consumes you, the ground you're coming, possess it. Hashem will strike with fever, swelling lesions, burning heat, thirst, the sword, and with blasts, with withering. They'll pursue you until your destruction. Again, it does not mean there'll be nothing left. And as you see, it's going to be a prediction of conquest and exile. If there's conquest and exile, then fever and swelling lesions and burning heat and thirst and sword and all the rest are expected. That's the kind of thing that happens when you're conquered. So given there's a prediction of conquest, these consequences are expected, fully expected. So they're certainly not unlikely. And therefore, again, they're not going to be useful as a prediction of something that's unlikely and therefore could support the truth of the Torah. Your heavens over your head will be copper, and the land beneath you will be iron. That's poetry. That's poetry. It certainly means you're not going to have plentiful and abundant and timely rains, but how bad? What kind of? Right? And the earth will be iron. It certainly means you're not going to have bumper crops, but how bad must it be? Hashem will make the rain of your land dust and dirt. The heaven will descend upon you until you're destroyed. Hashem will cause you to be struck down before your enemies. Okay, there are military battles. There are ups and downs. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. On one road you'll go out against him. On 7 roads you will flee before him. He'll win the battle and you'll run for your life. And you will be a cause of terror to all the kings of the earth. In other words, people look at you and say, wow, look what happened to them. People will shudder when they look at you. Your carcass will be food for every bird of the sky and animal of the earth. Nothing will frighten them. Yeah, when there are battles, and there are a lot of dead, if you lose the battles, there'll be dead people on the field, and the animals and the birds will eat the carcasses. That's normal in any war. Hashem will strike with the boils of Egypt, with hemorrhoids, wet boils, dry boils, which cannot be cured. If you're running for your life, if there's large-scale displacement of populations, there are going to be diseases, there are going to be infections. Hashem will strike you with madness, with blindness, with confounding the heart. You grope at noontime as a blind man gropes in the darkness. You will not succeed on your way. You will only cheated and robbed all the days. There will be no savior. All of this predicts a disaster. But how big a disaster, and is a disaster which definitely would have to be caused by a supernatural cause? I'm inclined to think that if the critic says it's not clear enough to bank anything on, I think it would be hard to answer him. You'll betroth a woman, another man will lie with her, you'll build a house, you'll not dwell in it, you'll plant a vineyard, you will not redeem it. The conqueror will come and disrupt your natural progress. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, you will not eat from it, your donkey will be robbed before you, will not return to you, your flocks will be given to your enemies, you'll have no savior, sons and daughters will be given to another people. Yeah, when there's conquest, the conqueror takes off slaves, and especially takes off the young who are healthy and strong. You'll have no savior. Be given to other people, your eyes will see and pine in vain for them all the day long, your hand will be powerless. Now let's try this. A nation unknown to you will devour the fruit of your ground and all your labor, and you'll be cheated and downtrodden all the days. Nation unknown to you? Why is that? When there's a conquest, is it usually by an unknown nation? Don't neighboring nations fight with one another, sometimes one conquers the other? Don't you have nations that create a kingdom, an empire? No one could say that Egypt was unknown to the Jewish people in Israel. If Egypt sets up an empire, defeats the Jewish armies, and spreads its empire to cover the Jewish people, that would not be an unknown nation. Or Greece, or Assyria, or Babylon. Those are all nations that Israel knew very well. Here's a prediction that could easily come out false, and that in the normal course of human experience usually comes out false. Now this passage is in fact describing the conquest by Rome. Rome was an unknown nation. There was no Roman culture. There was no evidence of any Roman Latin language here. Rome was too far away. It was a new nation creating a new empire. And in fact, this came out true. But this is a detailed prediction. It's not poetical. And it's something which we have no reason to think would be normal to happen. So I think here you have a particular detail which counts as unlikely. You'll go mad from the sight of your eyes, you will see. Hashem will strike with a foul boil, and these are your legs, cannot be cured, the sole of your foot to your crown. Hashem will lead you and your king, whom you set up over yourself, to a nation you never knew. Now that you know your forefathers. Again, the conqueror is going to be this unknown nation. And again, that's going out on a limb. That's not something which would be normally expected. And it's the same thing. I'm not saying it counts as a separate prediction, obviously, but it's reinforcing the idea that this is something which you couldn't have expected. And there you work for the gods of others, wood of stone. You'll be a source of astonishment, a parable, and conversation piece among all the peoples that Hashem will lead you. They'll say, oh, these are the Jews. Look how downtrodden they are. Look how they're just a disaster. You will take abundant seed out of the field, but you'll harvest little, for the locust will devour it. There'll be, locust swarms happen. They happen normally. Plant vineyards and work them, but you will not drink it, you will not gather them in, for the worm will eat it. You'll have olive trees throughout your boundaries, but you will not anoint them with the oil, because your olives will drop. Bear sons and daughters, it will not be yours, they'll go into captivity. The trees and fruit of the ground, the chirping locust will impoverish. The strangers among you will ascend higher and higher, will you ascend lower and lower. He will lend to you, you will not lend to him. He'll be a head, you'll be a tail. all these curses will come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed, because you will not have hearkened to the voice of Hashem your God, to observe his commandments, the decrees that he commands you. They will be a sign and a wonder in you and your offspring forever, because you did not serve Hashem your God, to be gladness and goodness of heart, when everything was abundant. So you will serve your enemies, whom Hashem will send against you in hunger and thirst, nakedness without anything. You will put iron yoke on your neck until he destroys you. Hashem will carry against you a nation from afar, from the end of the earth. Now a little more detail, not just one you don't know. Nation from afar, from the end of the earth, as an eagle will swoop, a nation whose language you will not understand. That's also a detail. And it's a verifiable detail. Was there any knowledge of Latin in Israel at the time? There was widespread knowledge of Greek. There's an enormous amount of archaeological evidence and historical evidence that there was a big Greek culture in the Jewish people at that time. Greek was a language that many people knew. If we had been conquered by a Greek city-state, this prediction would have come out false. If we'd been conquered by any neighboring state, it would have come out false. Conquered by any local state that has a cognate language, it would have come out false. As it was the Romans, and when the Romans conquered us, they defeated the Jewish armies 3 times. The 3rd time, they brought home the legion from Britain. And that was the one that engineered the final defeat and the destruction of the temple and the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people. And that was the end of the earth. Britain at that time was the end of the earth that they knew. A brazen nation that will not be respectful to the old or gracious to the young. This nation will slaughter people indiscriminately. Old, young, they'll just kill people. That also is very unusual. If you read about conquest in ancient times, especially when you're talking about an empire, the purpose of conquest is economic. You defeat the army and you tax the remaining population. Some of them you take off as slaves, but you want to leave the ones behind who can work and who can produce, so you can tax them. You don't destroy your means of production. The Romans, who ran Europe and North Africa for 300 years, did it only twice. In the dozens of communities that they conquered, they only did it twice, to us and to Carthage. Everywhere else, and the Assyrians and the Babylonians, the rule in conquest and running an empire was defeat the army and tax the remaining population. It takes money to run an empire. And that's where it comes from. To be told that this conqueror is going to slaughter people, young and old, without discrimination, is to be told something which was very rare in conquest in the ancient world. It will devour the fruit of your animals, the fruit of your ground, until you are destroyed. It will not leave you grain or wine or oil, offspring and cattle, flocks of your sleeping goats, until it causes you to perish. Besiege you in all your cities, until the collapse of your high and fortified walls, in which you trusted, throughout your land, will besiege you in all your cities and all your land that Hashem your God has given you. Eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, Hashem your God has given you in the siege and distress, or your enemies will distress you. In other words, when you put up a siege around a city, it means nothing goes in and out. That means there's no food. What's going to happen? Now, the prediction here is that when your children die, it's not talking about killing your children, but when your children die, you'll be in such terrible hunger that you'll eat the flesh of your children. I want you to know, as far as I have read in the memoirs of the Holocaust, with all of the horrific conditions there, this is never mentioned. This is never mentioned. But it is mentioned in historical sources about the siege of the Romans. What the difference in time, difference in culture was, I don't know, but this is a prediction of something very drastic, and in fact came true. In the siege of Trust. The man among you who is tender and very delicate will turn selfish against his brother, wife as his bosom, against the remaining children he has let survive, not even one of the flesh of his children. In other words, ones that are dead, he'll take it for himself and he won't even sit. I can't even read it. It's too hard to read. Okay, down to 58. That's just describing eating this flesh of dead children. If you will not be careful to perform all the words of this Torah written in this book, to fear and honor also the name, your Hashem, your God, then Hashem will make extraordinary your blows and the blows of your offspring, great and faithful blows, evil and faithful illnesses. Will bring you back upon you all the sufferings of Egypt, of which you were terrified, and will cleave to you. Even any illness, any blow that was not written in the book of the Torah, Hashem will bring upon you until you're destroyed. You'll be left few in number. So it means it's not that there's nobody left. There will be, but there'll be few in number. Instead of having been like the stars of heaven in abundance, for you will not have hearkened to the voice of Hashem your God. And it will be just as Hashem rejoiced over you to benefit you and multiply you. So Hashem will cause them to rejoice over you, to make you perish, to destroy you, be torn from upon the ground to which you come to possess it. Hashem will scatter you among all the peoples, from the end of the earth to the end of the earth. Here's another prediction, a detailed, literal prediction of exile. Now, just as the policy of conquest was to leave a working population so as to be able to tax them, there was no policy of exile. There was no such thing. In the ancient world, this is utterly unknown. I've written this many years ago, and someone sent me an email. What about the Assyrians? Didn't they do that? So I looked it up. The Assyrian policy was this. You don't want the population that you've conquered to have leaders. You don't want them to have people who can lead a revolt. So you take off the leadership, the intelligentsia, the clever, the impressive, the top 5% of the population. But you leave the 95% of the population where they are because they've always been there. They know the agriculture of the area. They know the economics of the area, and they can be productive. If you kick them off the land, you've lost the productivity of that whole population. It's just stupid. And people didn't do it. Conquering empires didn't do it. So here's a prediction again of something which, in normal terms, should be regarded as unlikely. And there you will work for others, for the gods of others whom you did not know. You or your forefathers' word of stone. And among those nations you will not be tranquil. There will be no rest for the sole of your foot. There Hashem will give you a trembling heart, longing of eyes, and suffering of soul. Your life will hang in the balance, and you'll be frightened night and day. You will not be sure of your livelihood. In the morning you'll say, who can give back last night? In the evening you'll say, who can give back morning? Because I have no hope for the future. For the fright of your heart that you will fear, and the sight of your eyes that you will see. This too, I think, is a prediction which doesn't have to come true. You're talking about the Jewish people going into exile. It says into exile. It says from one end of the earth to the other. That also is a detail that we should pay attention to. Let's say, for whatever crazy reason, they decide to kick us out of the land of Israel. Why should we go to China? Why should we go to New Zealand? Least of all, Los Angeles. Why should we go to Johannesburg, Alaska? Why? Stay in the Mediterranean basin. You know the Mediterranean basin. You know the agriculture. You know the climate. You know the people. You know the economy. Stay where you can do the most that you can do. How can you confidently predict that Jews will be all over the world? Nothing like this has happened to any other people in the whole history of the world. So you have a prediction here which is extremely unlikely to come true because in human experience it only happened once. And now, if you're going to be scattered so widely, who's to say that somewhere a sizable population of Jews won't set up its own kingdom, its own state, and enjoy freedom and self-determination and live a productive life? Who's to say that won't happen? Who's to say that can't happen? Why is it so unlikely? Don't think of today. Today, every square inch of the Earth's surface is under the control of one government, and a bunch of them are in contest between several governments. There was a time when there weren't maps, there weren't boundary lines. There were vast spaces that were just open. You had to take 2,000 or 3,000 people and set up a city there. No one's going to stop you because nobody wants it. Nobody cares about it. Who's to say that that can't happen? And yet, it's a prediction that held good for 1,900 years. That's a long time. In 1,900 years, you had no case of a Jewish group setting up its own, what's called polity, its own self-governing area, and enjoying a certain amount of prosperity and security, having its own army and protecting itself, its own economy. No record of it in 1,900 years of exile. So these are predictions of detail, which it seems to me that are unlikely to take place. No one else is going to predict that these things are going to happen. These are predictions of things that are very improbable, and therefore, if they come true, they count in favor of this prediction and against competing points of view. And there's one more prediction which is extremely important. If you take a look at 1091, which is the end of this passage, chapter 30, it will be when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse that I presented before you, that you will take it to your heart among the nations where Hashem your God has dispersed you, and you will return unto Hashem your God and listen to his voice, according to everything that I command you today, you and your children, with all your heart and soul. Then Hashem your God will bring back your captivity and mercy on you, gather you in from all the peoples to which Hashem has scattered you. If you are dispersed, be at the ends of the heavens. From there Hashem will gather you in, and from there he will take you. Hashem your God will bring you to the land of your forefathers, possess, and you will possess it. He will do good to you and make you more numerous to your forefathers, Hashem, etc. So it means this is a prediction of survival. There'll be conquest, utter destruction, and exile, scatter, but you will survive, and you'll eventually come back to the land of Israel. Nothing like that has happened in the whole history of the world. Nothing like that has happened in the whole history of the world. So it seems to me in this prediction, this passage, you have some predictions which are not poetical. Some of them are poetical, and I'm not using those. And some of them would be expected under any conditions. I'm not using those. But there are predictions that are very unlikely under any other point of view, and which, in fact, took place. And that means that this prediction is evidence for the truth of the Torah. Are we together? Yeah? Okay. Now, let me share with you some ways in which this idea has been misunderstood and misinterpreted, and try to sort them out for you. Some are simple and some border on some interesting general philosophical ideas. Some people say this: look, I can easily understand why someone would make a prediction like this. Prediction like this is for the purpose of scaring people. You have a set of commandments, you have an agreement with a God, with a creator, and now there'll be pressures and there'll be temptations. The text, whoever's writing the text, wants to motivate the person to live up to the laws. It says to listen, if you don't live up to the laws, it's going to be a gigantic disaster. I can easily understand why someone, even a human author, I don't have to assume that God wrote it. A human author would write this in order to frighten people so as to make them obey. Why do you think that this had to be written by God? Parents do this to children. They make up stories of what's going to happen to them in order to frighten them into obeying them. Why do you think this has to be written by God? This remark is due to the fact that there are other arguments that people present and for which that remark would be relevant, and they're different from what I'm doing here, and they're not the same at all. Now I have to see what the difference is. If you heard carefully, the critic who offers this critique is using words, vocabulary, ideas that I didn't mention in my presentation. I didn't mention them at all. I didn't ask at any point, why would anybody write this? What kind of motivation would he have? And so on. So I didn't ask that. Now let me set out for you two different types of argument. The one that I have, I'll set out the one on the other side, and hope to make clear to you what the difference is. We are now in the Sabbatical Year. Sabbatical Year is a year in which the agricultural work is suspended. Whole year, roughly no agricultural work is done. Can't plant, can't harvest. 1 out of every 7 years, no agricultural work. Now there are people who say, isn't that self-defeating? Aren't you shooting yourself in the foot? 1/7 of your agricultural production you're giving up? No human being would have written that down. That's crazy. If a human being would have written that down in a book and given it to people, they would have read that page and said, that's a stupid book. Forget that. We're not listening to that. That's dumb. It's self-destructive. It's self-defeating. Why is it that the people accepted the book? Only because it came from God. If it had come from a human being, they never would have listened to it. So, the book must be given by God. That's a kind of argument. So some people say, wait a minute, what about crop rotation? Isn't there an idea that if you leave a field fallow, then it's more productive after time? So maybe that's it. Maybe it's just a question of increasing productivity. And the answer to that is no, it can't be that way, because no one would stop working all the fields together at the same time for a year. What you would do is each year you would leave 1/7 of the fields fallow, and you would that way increase the productivity over a continuous basis. Okay, but look at this argument. This argument I think is very weak. I don't use any arguments of this kind. No one would accept it unless it came from God because it's too stupid, it's too self-injurious, too self-destructive. I don't use that type of argument because who's to say what the psychology was? And indeed, think about some of the things you have in other religions. Some of the things you have in other religions are pretty horrible. How self-destructive can you get people to be if they are in the grips of an ideology? Look at the suicide bombers. Not only the suicide bombers. I don't know if you know this about the Second World War. Suicide bombing is not a new invention. In the Second World War, Japanese pilots flew their planes into American ships. They blew themselves up in order to blow up American ships. They were dying for the emperor, dying for the fatherland. Right? Nobody said it's so self-destructive and so forth and so on. So the argument that the book says Q is just absolutely crazy. No one's going to listen to Q unless it comes from God. I think that type of argument is worthless. That type of argument is based only on your attempt to understand the psychology. We don't understand the psychology of 2,500 years ago that well, and other similar things have been done by other people. Another example they give is 3 times a year, a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. All the men, at least, some say women as well, but all the men have to come to Jerusalem. That means your borders are undefended. That's crazy. Anybody can invade. Anybody can attack. So obviously it has to come from God, because if a human being had written it, no one would listen to it. So I think that's also a worthless argument. Because first of all, not every undefended border is dangerous. There are no defenses between the United States and Canada. By golly, no defenses. How could America do that? Aren't they afraid that Canada will invade? No, actually, they're not afraid that Canada will invade because, Canada just isn't a competitor. When you're strong, you can leave your defense because they know you'll destroy them if they invade. You don't worry about keeping a mounted guard on your borders, right? And you might be friendly with your neighbors. So, this type of argument, no human being would have written it because it's too crazy. That's not the argument that I'm making. Therefore, somebody says over here, well, you wonder why a human being wrote this frightening threat that there's going to be destruction if you don't obey God. I'm not wondering that. I never asked why someone would write it. I never asked whether it's so crazy that it would only be accepted if God wrote it. That wasn't the argument. The argument was that it predicts things that shouldn't happen. Predicts things that shouldn't happen. Even if I understand why someone would make it up, but it shouldn't come true, because they're very unlikely to come true. My wife, many, many years ago, supervised a kind of parent-teacher evaluation program where the kids were brought these are preschool kids, and they were brought, and it was kind of group play led by some kind of trained psychology, and then part of the time the kids played and the parents taught, and parents filled out forms, and there was some kind of help in their parenting and understanding the whole thing. And one of the forms said, does your child have any fears? And one parent wrote, no, except when I tell him that if he doesn't do what I tell him, I'm going to flush him down the toilet. Isn't that terrifying? Isn't that something? And another mother wrote, except when I tell him that if he doesn't do what I tell him, then the monster's going to get him. So now we think, oh, that's horrific. But we can understand how misled, simplistic, incapable parents would write such a thing. But you don't expect that if the child disobeys his mother, then the monster will get him. You don't expect it to happen. If it really happened, boy, you'd have a different story. And then you want to know, what kind of inside track was the mother on? How does she know what the monster is? You all of a sudden treat it very realistically. Here, it's not a question of the author and how reasonable the author is, and whether it be reasonable for a human author to write it or to be only written by God. The point is that it makes predictions that you wouldn't expect to come true, and the predictions come true. That sounds like whoever wrote the prediction knows something that we don't know. Yes?
Two things about the thing that you say. First one is like, when he's reading, he will gather you from all the peoples to whom Hashem, God has scattered you. I mean, it's been 100 years ago, this prophecy was not true, so people wouldn't have to believe in that, because like everything was not true what was in it. And the second thing was, maybe I'm mistaken, but what you say about like only to the Jews these kind of things have happened, maybe Armenians, for instance, who believe that what is written in these texts is true, have suffered more or less what is written in these texts. Like they were in their land, they went into exile, and they suffered a lot of things, and now they have their state, Armenia, that did not exist a few centuries ago. So maybe it's not only the Jews. I mean...
Okay, well, first of all, I don't think you're right about that. There is no state, Armenia. They do not have a state. They are still scattered. They're still in exile, and they do not have a state.
Yeah, maybe in 200 years.
Maybe, but they don't now. They don't now. Number one. Number two, I agree with you. This prediction is a prediction in the text future, and 100 years ago, one could not have cited it as true. I agree with you. I'm just talking about from my point of view now. If you want to go back 100 or 200 years and ask what evidence they had all the other predictions. But I agree with you. We have an extra. However, I will give you half of your point. The whole of the text has not come true yet, because the majority of Jews are still outside the land of Israel, and this predicts that at least the majority will come back, and that hasn't yet happened. Still, what has happened has not happened in the history of any other nation in the history of the world.
That the Armenians have a state,
state. No, they do not. No, they do not. There's no state of Armenia today.
Of course, there is a state of Armenia.
Since that state was destroyed by the Turks, right, they have remained as an exiled population, and the Turks never owned up to the fact what they did to them. There's no independent state of Armenia, as far as I know. I'm going to look it up. I'll look it up in Wikipedia, but I don't think it's true. Now, I would wonder if they are scattered to the ends of the earth. Is there an Armenian population in China?
No, but I mean, they went pretty far. They are in New Zealand, they are in France, they are in the United States. Like, it's not everywhere, but it's...
Okay. And furthermore, I don't...
And the capital of Armenia is Yerevan. I know it now. It's located east of Turkey.
Uruguay? Uruguay is in South America.
No, Armenia.
Yeah.
And the capital is Yerevan. It's like a real city, and they had like commemoration a few...
I think it's part of. I think it's a part of another country, and I think that they're celebrating. It's I think it's the 100th year of the. That's why the Pope declared that the Armenian thing was a real Holocaust, and he made the Turks very angry because he said that. I think that's the city where they were, but I don't think there's this independent state of Armenia today. Let's look it up. We can look it up. At any rate, The text does not say that this is something which will only happen to the Jews. If it happened twice in all of human history, it would still be a very unlikely prediction. Now, they may believe in this text, but they don't believe that they're the Jews. I don't think that they believe that they are the Jews. They are the inheritors of this text. So it's something which, if I said that your child will be born with two hearts, I say, well, in the last 300 years, there were two such births, mine and somebody else, that would not make it a foolish, an inaccountable prediction. It'd still be very, very surprising that it happened to you. If it happened twice out of hundreds and hundreds of nations, right? If it was really arbitrary, even if it happened twice, it shouldn't happen to you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
So I think it still counts as evidence. It still counts as evidence. That's all he wants. So the idea that we could understand the motivation of the writer has nothing to do with this argument. This argument is about the unlikelihood of its coming true, and in fact, they all came true. It's public history that they all came true, and therefore it is definitely positive evidence that the books that it comes from is a true book. Now tomorrow we'll talk about. I'll go back through this again as usual, but then we'll talk about other challenges to this argument, which are a little more sophisticated, and we'll see how far we get.